Hello, welcome to another full hour-long edition of Gardener's World. And here at Berryfield, our borders are beginning to hit their summer glory. Look at this combination of the oriental poppy and the delphinium. The two colours are like electricity together. Although, in fact, one of the plants that's giving me as much pleasure as any at this time of year is this Stipa tenuissima. Wonderful, rich green, and you can't resist just rummaging your hands through it as you pass by. A real treasure. In fact, at this time of year, although there are these marvellous flowers, it is still really all about foliage. Look at the onopodeums. They've just got so much life in them. It's interesting, we're walking around pointing hands at everything.
We're just arguing about this forget-me-not in here. See, yes. I think it looks great against the grey foliage, but Rachel's determined to dig it up.
It's going, definitely.
More.
It's the only blue here. Everything is pink, mauve, purple, no blue. It doesn't look right to me at all.
Steely determination. How do you feel it's shaping up? I mean, do you feel that it's coming into what you
On
imagined?
the whole, I think it's looking for such a baby. It looks really mature and abundant. So I'm very pleased with that.
I think that abundance is created by some of the plants that you've used as well. I mean, just take a look at that poppy. It's clearly not planted there. It's just found its home there. Yeah. And it just looks superb. And the flower is beautiful. Yes. That's going to be a real stunner right on the edge of the path.
Very, very busy day today. Lots to get through.
Yes, I noticed that in a cottage garden we could do with a few climbers, so I think I might go shopping.
You're going shopping again?
Well, we're going to go building. We're making an arbour together.
Yeah, you heard that.
But you can start by getting this stuff out. I've got something to do first.
I can't wait to see that.
Yeah, me neither.
I planted up the cottage garden a month ago on a memorably wet day, and it's in that state now where newly planted gardens that haven't really started to grow, but they are producing flowers, so it's a dwarf version of itself. But the lupin's lovely, that beautiful crisp shape to each individual flower. And we've made this patio, and we've used old bits of broken stone and brick, but kept them within a grid, and I think that's perfect. Exactly gets the feel of a cottage garden. I saw this table and chairs at Chelsea, liked it very much, and it sits perfectly in there. If you remember, I cut back this mallet, really hacked into it, and just in a few weeks, that's grown back, got some air and some light and a nice shape. And by the end of the summer, that will have grown tall again, and hopefully with a decent amount of flower. Look at that Robascum. Isn't that beautiful? That soft yellow. And it goes really well with an Nepeta, which is sprawling a bit, but that doesn't matter. We can cut that back. You can see this little pink that I planted is picking up on the other pinks that were already in the border, that rather blue one in the corner, and the bright magenta colour over there. Now, the other week we planted up the hot end of our long border, but the cool end is looking at its best now. We've got this Alba semiplena and the Melianthus and the Ferula communis and the Cardoon, although that's got some aphids, and I'll be coming back to that later on. And then down there we've got the hosta and this wonderful onopodeum, and they've all got these silvery blue-green colours working together. Love them. The 20-pound border is not looking spectacular yet, and that's because all the plants are doing their work underground, so I'm not at all worried about that. And I wonder if any of you are trying a border for £20, how they're getting on. You can come and tell us when we go to Gardener's World Live. OK, let's go and make that arbour. You started. You don't need me.
I just thought I'd put the back posts in first.
The arbour we're building is obviously to contain a seat. And what we decided to do is use larch posts. Very rustic. Chris and I will put it together as best we may, rough and ready. Neither of us are experts in this. But hopefully it'll be a relaxed, casual feel, and it will look good. If you do it, Chris, I will.
I was going to say...
Straight away, looking at that, that one's higher, which is fine.
Yeah. The problem, actually, is getting them upright because there's so much variation in the timbers.
How's that?
Yep.
The plan is we're going to put 4 posts in, put a frame round the top, and then gable ends, which will tie it together and hold it, and then we'll just clad it as best we may. Look at that. Get the camera in on that. Spot on. It's a little bit low, but we'll use a wobbly bit of wood. And this is sustainable timber. There's no need to preserve the bases. There's no need to slap anything on it. The wood itself will last a good long time. The gables obviously have got to meet. Now, how do we make that joint? Do we mitre them, and neither Chris nor I are carpenters, so it's a bit dodgy, or do we just butt them together? And my feeling is with a rustic construction like this, it's better to keep it simple.
If you went up so that it was... It would be up there somewhere. Colosseum springs to mind. No, don't even go there.
think this is time to go make a cup of tea.
So it's 183 divided by 2.
So that will come off.
And that one will sit on top of that one. So that should
Right,
cut.
you're cutting that, because if I do it, with all the best will in the world, I'll do it wrong. You have to get one side
I'm
of it.
moving well out of the way.
I think the best thing to do is just assemble it on the ground. Okay. What I would do is cut one piece and then use the wrong piece to make it.
Yeah, I've seen
Throw
shelves
away.
in your house.
So, we need the ridge.
What you could do to make it more stable is to put a bracing point in there.
And the ridge doesn't need to be very long, although do you think it should overhang at the back?
Give you something. Yes.
think
If in
it
doubt,
should.
cut it too long.
So that goes like that.
Yeah. I first made one of these when I was about 8, you know.
Did you?
It looked exactly like this.
I bet it did.
If you close one eye and
Yeah.
squint, it looks almost square.
Okay. This is the moment of truth. Come on, let's just do it. 1, 2, 3. Now we should notch in here, shouldn't we?
Yeah, that's all right, isn't it?
Yeah. Okay, that will take us about another hour to finish this off. So let's say a couple of hours of work, which personally I enjoy, and a total cost of 75 quid for the wood and the nails. However, if you don't want to make it yourself, you can buy arbours, and we've got a selection to give you some ideas. This tubular metal arch came from a DIY centre. Now, the style is Victorian, and if you like it, I would say it was very good value because it comes in at under £30, which to me is amazing. This wooden rustic rose arch was easy to put together. You didn't need a saw, just a screwdriver. It's made from pressure-treated softwood. I like this galvanised steel metal arbour. It costs £75, looks very stylish, although it is quite shallow to be a true arbour. This Harrogate bower is made out of metal and we had to assemble it. It cost under £200, but it was tricky and fiddly to put together. In fact, it took as long as to completely make our own arbour. This is the most expensive of our examples with its own built-in seat. Now, it's also made from pressure-treated softwood, which doesn't age very well, so I would suggest to make it look at its best, you need to paint it. So you need to cost that in.
Well, once you've got your arbour, you need some plants to grow up it. And when it comes to climbers, I think you get to the garden centre and there is a mind-boggling selection to choose from. The trick is to know what the conditions are in your own garden before you buy, and then don't be distracted. And it's very easily done. Look at this, Solia heterophylla. It's an Australian native, it's not hardy, but it's absolutely beautiful. The best thing for it would be to keep it in a pot, bring it out in the summer and enjoy it outside, and then make sure it goes into a cool greenhouse or even a conservatory over the winter months. But it's got these lovely blue pendulous flowers, very, very pretty. Another favourite is this jasmine, and this is a new variety called clotted cream. And it's also got small flowers, but instead of being brilliant white like most jasmines, it's a very soft, pale, creamy colour. And again, it's not terribly hardy, so in the south you probably could get away with it outside all year, provided it's on a sort of warm, sheltered wall. But otherwise, again, I would give that some protection over the winter. Well, at the other end of the spectrum, fully hardy and tough as old boots, is this climbing hydrangea. In fact, it's perfect for a cool north-facing wall. Now, it climbs using roots on the stems, and it's a little bit slow to get going initially, but once you guide it towards the wall, you'll find that a couple of years after planting, it just romps away and it gets up to about 20 metres in height and spread, so it's quite large. I need something a little bit smaller, I think, for our cottage garden, and a honeysuckle would be lovely. Now this one, Dropmore Scarlet, just look at the flowers on that. Really beautiful and very unusual, but it's not scented, and I think, again, in the cottage garden you really need some perfume. So I'm going to go for another favourite, this one here, Graham Thomas, Periclymum Graham Thomas. Look at that, lovely whorls of creamy flowers. Gorgeous scent. It's not too big. It only gets to about 3 metres in height and spread, so it'll be perfect to grow up a tripod. But if you're looking for fragrance, a huge range of colours and real versatility, I still think it's very hard to beat a rose. Look at this one, Madame Caroline Testu. Just look how beautiful that is. But if you want to choose a rose, then I do think the best thing is not to decide on it in the garden centre. Go and see them where they're growing in a garden situation. And Chris did just that. He visited a garden near us at Bury Fields, where he was really spoilt for choice.
Perhaps one of the most remarkable houses in Britain is here at Coton Court, just outside Stratford. It's been passed down through the generations of the same family for over 500 years. And perhaps even more remarkable than that is that up until 12 years ago, there was no garden here at all. And the gardens you see today are a clear example of what happens when you mix passion with design flair. After 500 years of there being no garden at Coton Court, it took the passion and enthusiasm of Claire Throckmorton to transform this once barren landscape.
Throckmorton's been here since 1409, when they built the house. None of the Throckmortons were gardeners, and there never was a garden here. We researched it very, very carefully. We went into all archival material, and there was no sign of anything, so it was virgin territory when I came here in 1990. There was a vegetable garden in this wall garden we're in now. It was used during World War II, dig for victory, and it had been let go. It was just full of bad polytunnels, flapping, broken glass. My husband and I personally cleared 12 skips of rubbish from this area.
But at least it gave you a clean canvas when you walked in.
I think that was a very lucky break for my daughter and myself. Very lucky break.
The gardens are incredibly formal, quite sort of classical in their design. Is that something that you try to achieve from the outset?
Yeah, we wanted a formal structure in here, but with lots of planting to soften it, because obviously around the house it's very green and architectural, and this is the flower garden really. But I suppose it is formal because the house and the church is such a strong feature. I suppose you'd call it classically English.
The back of the house in what's known as the formal garden, we started there. So we did the formal bits in about 1991, 2 and 3. And then we didn't start this wall garden till 96. The first thing was I didn't have a lot of money, so I had to grow the plants. So I used the wall garden as a nursery. It was full of rows of plants which I was propagating myself. As you see, we have a cool and a hot border. But of course we had to build around the plants that we had got, as well as buying some in. But we had a very limited budget. And this is the first year it's looked good, but we've increased the Jane Phillips irises, the Patty's plum poppies. The hot border is nowhere near its best yet. When you see that in July, August, it's a mass of really clashing reds and oranges and yellows, and you really feel quite, you're in a sort of Mediterranean, passionate, sort of hot climate.
What was it that inspired you to get the bog garden up and running?
Well, that was a difficult decision because we have a lake. So I decided to take advantage of the swampy, moisture, loving sort of environment and make it into a bog garden. So we started putting up the boardwalks, and I used I propagated some of my grandmother's pampas grass and made a sort of island in it. And then slowly we built up virtually 100% from our own plants. I took gunneras out of the lakeside and propagated and moved them on. Now we've got lovely ones there. Rogersius, the same. And sadly dead, gave me those. And slowly planted out. And we haven't had to spend a lot of money on that, but it has gone. It's romped away. It's an example of planting to suit the environment you're in. Don't try and do something that won't work there. That's another thing about gardening. Control, control, control. There's no such thing as a natural garden. It doesn't exist.
I hope we've got it right. I think it was one of the things I was quite conscious of when I was, back of the envelope and pencil. I'm the sort of enabler, the facilitator, and she's the, it's her garden, actually. I mean, I love it, and it's my garden too, but, without her, it wouldn't have happened.
When I was at school, I would dream of roses. And this is the ultimate fulfillment, if you like, of a little girl drawing at her desk illegally when she shouldn't have been, underneath the notebook, when she should have been doing her Latin exercises. I was drawing roses.
And what's more important to you, the way that the rose looks or the fragrance that the rose has?
Oh, what an awfully difficult question. They're inseparable. If I absolutely had to choose, and I don't want to choose, I'd probably go for the looks. But I would never choose a rose that didn't have a fragrance anyway. And what is nice is just coming out here in the evening when the public have gone, my husband and I come with a drink and we sit here, and that is just heaven.
I remember back in February when I was explaining this garden, I said that this arbour is where you'd find me, sitting looking at the sunset. And here we are, 5 months later, it's actually happened. I think Chris and I have made a good job of this. It's simple, it's rustic, but it will do the job very nicely. And we've got a nice seat to go in here, made from English hardwood, and it's almost complete, but not quite, because the whole reason for an arbour is to support flowers. And I've always wanted roses on here because that gives us the combination of lovely flowers in the summer and then hips, and of course hips are fruit. This is, after all, an ornamental fruit garden. So it's important to choose the right rose. Now, the choice is limited really to cover this between climbers and ramblers. They're both climbing roses, but they do perform in different ways. Ramblers tend to have clusters of small flowers. This is Mannington Cascade, and it's got white double flowers. Very beautiful. And then you've got the dark, almost blue flowers of bleu magenta, and it is, as the name describes, that mixture of the two. Most ramblers tend towards white, and this one, Sir Cedric Morris, which was a sport of Rosa glauca, is massive. That will cover a whole house with these small, single white flowers with their little yellow centres, and next to it, Kew Rambler, which is pretty and pink. But on this side, I've got a small selection of climbers, and they tend to have bigger flowers and will flower more often. So this is the famous New Dawn, which has got these glossy green leaves. It can be evergreen if it's a mild winter and will produce flowers all summer long. This delicious pale pink, a great favourite and very easy to grow rose. This is slightly more unusual. This is a Gallica, and it's complicata. Very simple but big single flowers, really rather like ginormous dog rose, and I think exceptionally beautiful, especially with these leaves. But that only flowers once. And this one is Madame Grégoire Steichlin. And the beauty of this is not only does it have these enormous, voluptuous pink flowers, which will go on all through the summer, but also it produces wonderful orange hips, and that's why I've chosen it to go over the arbour. Now, unlike complicata, most climbers are repeat flowering. New Dawn will go on flowering all summer. Some of them will flower once and again later in the year, whereas most ramblers just flower once and then they're over. Now, when you're training these roses, ramblers are difficult to train and you tend to just prune back to shape, whereas climbers, you can train quite specifically, so perhaps more suitable for limiting over an arbour. Now, I'm going to put one either side. I've dug out a decent hole in preparation, and I'm going to put some of our own garden compost in the bottom. And as ever, that's not really so much to feed the plant, but to provide a good soil structure and also a water retentive base so it gets off to a good start. Okay. Now you can see that this has been potted up, as all roses are, with the grafting point, the union, well above soil level. But I do want to plant that below soil level because that will stop the problem of suckers and also help with root rot. So I've got a deep in there. There we go. Push that in so that holds it in place. And the backfill. It's quite a thorny rose, this one. But that won't matter because we won't be walking past it. And obviously water that in well. Now, as with any rose, what you've got to do after planting is prune it back hard. But you know, if you buy roses in flower, that really, it may be good horticulture, but it's not a good way to live. I think the sensible thing to do is enjoy the flowers. Let it do what it can this summer, and then in the autumn, I'll give it an extra hard prune. But what I will do is water that in well and get the rest of these roses in the ground. But at this time of year, there are a whole number of small jobs that need doing.
Well, unfortunately, I missed seeing the tulips in their full glory this year. But now, here in the border, they're definitely not looking so good. Foliage is gone. And I'm going to take them out to make space for something more interesting. So you can clean them off and store them over the summer before replanting them late in the autumn, and they'll flower again in the spring. Alternatively, you could try leaving them in. Many gardeners do that. You might find that the flowers get slightly smaller each year, but if you add to them with the same variety, you shouldn't notice.
Everything we grow in this garden that's edible, we grow to be as good as possible. And I think that applies to strawberries more than anything else. You can buy strawberries 365 days a year, most of it grown under polythene, sprayed with chemicals and tasting of nothing at all. But if you grow them yourself, you have that wonderful, rich strawberryness in season and eaten warm from the soil. Believe you me, there's nothing like it. So to get the best from them, there are just a few little jobs you need to do. First of all, go through them and weed them at this stage. And then they need mulching. And what that is primarily to do is to keep these green strawberries off the soil as they ripen, so they don't get muddy and also the slugs don't get at them. And I'm trying an experiment this year. I'm using something called Strolch. It's a new product, just on the market, which is straw that's organically grown, but it's been treated with minerals, which delays its decomposition. And that means you don't get that slimy mat that you can get with straw. But it will biodegrade down into the soil, improving it. But as it does so, it doesn't rob the soil of nitrogen. So potentially, it's a really useful mulch. It's coming into garden centres, but you can look on our website for details and they will deliver directly to you. I don't know if it's going to work, but it sounds as though it might be a good thing to try.
Now that our plants have put on a really good growth spurt in spring, it's a good opportunity to increase stock by layering. What you're looking for is a young, whippy stem like that, and pinch off the leaves along about a 4-inch length. Take a knife and just scratch back to the cambium layer, and in that cambium layer, it's packed with hormones, and those hormones, once they come into contact with the soil, will start to encourage the development of roots. Use a wire pin to hold the shoot into the ground. And within a season, what you'll end up with is a plant that's twice the size of the original layer. So it makes it an incredibly efficient way of multiplying your stock. And also, you've got guaranteed success because there's this umbilical cord back to the parent plant. So your young plant isn't going to be short of nutrients or moisture. It is about the most economical way of propagating stock. And it's cost me, what, the price of a bit of compost and about £3 for a pot. But if you want a slightly more exclusive pot than this, there's a man down in the Cotswold called Jim Keeling who produces something a little bit more glamorous.
I know from time about 6, I had a clay pit down the bottom of my garden. I was always fascinated by clay. You could do anything with it, you could make things out of it. It changed nature. And sometimes the clay is very difficult, and that's a challenge, and sometimes it's superb, and then you think, God, I can make anything. And you can't really get bored with a craft which is so fantastically difficult to get right. Gardening's all about detail. You could just have a boring old lawn, but what's fun is to work out little quirky bits here and there, which make the garden yours. And it's the same with pots. You can just go out and buy a bog standard machine-made one, but they're very boring. Why not take a pot with a lot more in the design? You're going to express your own personality with what you choose, and you can start off with something simple, and then you can go for something more ornate. You might want something with basket work on, or swags, or a lovely shape like an Alibaba. But they're all reflections of your character, and they can also reflect the different characters of parts of your garden. So you might want a corner where it's all very simple and straightforward and rather formal, another part where it's all rather expansive and marvellous plantings. When you first get a pot, it's worth soaking it. You're going to put a plant in it which is young and tender and is going to have a bit of a shock to its root ball as you repot it. Either spray it with a hose pipe or dip it in a bucket of water or a pond or something. The trick of good craftsman design is that people think that they've seen it before. In actual fact, they haven't. You're designing within the tradition, moving it slightly further forward, hybridizing it with whatever the modern taste is for proportion. So you're constantly reinterpreting. Plots have lots of uses in the garden. You can be very inventive. They can be formal, they can be a focal point. You can have them in the centre of the lawn, like I've got them here. You can have them planted, you can have them empty. I'll put other pots inside them, make a sort of still life. And they can focus up any view. They're very, very good for focus. They acquire a lovely patina. Orange is a very good colour for supporting green. It's a complementary colour. And once it's aged a bit and fades back, it just lifts the plants up without shouting too much. You don't have to worry about whether you got it right. And with a flower pot, you can put in plants which you think, oh, they'll never work together, but I'll try. And you can be outrageous. It doesn't matter how big your garden is or how small it is, there's always somewhere you can put a flower pot. I love throwing Alibabas because they're rather womanly. Well, you'd have a foot, then you have the belly, then you have the shoulder, then you have the neck. And they always move a bit. I mean, they're never quite centered when you put them back on the wheel, so they have a sort of dance with you. And it's a fine-run thing whether or not that works sometimes. You know, people say it's terribly therapeutic and it's lovely, but it's also, there's a lot of grit goes into making them. You've got to put a lot of yourself into them, and that comes out in the pots. They're made with not just love, sometimes they're made with a lot of other emotions as well, but they are made with emotion, yes.
Of course, one of the great things about using pots and containers, tubs of any sort, is that you can completely control the environment that your plants are growing in, which means that if you, for instance, don't have a pond, you can still use water-loving plants. It's just that you do it in a container. And this is a solid metal container where we've bunged up the holes. But if you're using terracotta or earthenware, make sure it's got a glaze on it, because those materials are porous and the water will leak out. I always put a good layer of grit in the bottom, and then any excess moisture will sit in the grit and not really bog the roots down. And then put in a good layer of charcoal. Now, one of the problems that you find in particularly an enclosed environment like this is that the microorganisms in the soil and compost, as they're digesting the organic matter, release noxious chemicals, one of which is hydrogen sulfide. Now, that hydrogen sulfide adheres to the charcoal, and the charcoal will keep the compost sweet and prevent that really stagnant egg smell, which is the hydrogen sulfide. When it comes to the compost, you need to use an aquatic compost, just like a normal pond or water garden. And to be honest, just about any bog or marginal plant will survive in a container like this. Just watch out for those really vigorous plants. Things like Geum rivali, the water avens, you very often see sprawling along stream sides with its nodding heads. Beautiful plant, but you do need a very big container. And similarly, Hoytinia chameleon. If you like the colours of the leaf, it's great, but it is pretty vigorous. It's the kind of couch grass of the aquatic zone. Personally, I would go for something a little bit more elegant, things like the Xanthostecias. There's a whole range available. And because of the colour combinations, I'm going to go with a golden yellow on this sort of copper-coloured container. And these plants are really at home in South Africa in bogs and stream sides. They love sitting with their feet in really sodden soil. And they've got special adaptations which allow them to sit in those conditions. They not only have very waxy shoots, which prevents water getting into the plant and oxygen being lost, but they also have a special parenchyma, which is a sort of straw-like structure inside the leaves and stems. And that means that air taken in through the leaf canopy is then pumped down into the root, because, of course, to survive, those roots do need air. And I'm mixing that with Equisetum scerpoides, which is a member of the horsetail family, which will just kind of create wonderful, delicate, tussocky, grass-like texture around the base. So once you've got those in, you can then top dress with the rest of the compost. Making sure that the crowns of the plants are all covered. And then what I tend to do is to put on a dressing of decorative cobbles to provide a sort of beach-like environment. Final task is, of course, to just add water. And the great thing about gardening in this sort of way is that you've, in a way, recreated the natural conditions that these plants would thrive in. And that is the trick of good gardening, because that will then allow them to really fight off any pests and disease, and they'll give you the best quality flowers.
It seems that every year in the garden there's one problem that dominates all others. It might be slugs, it might be pigeons, but this year it's certainly aphids. Now, they are amazing creatures. They can reproduce at a phenomenal rate, up to 6 times a day. And of course, each of those will then reproduce themselves until you can get millions and millions of them in a tiny space of time. And what they love is new, soft growth on plants. And of course, the conditions this year have been perfect for that. We've had good growing weather, so everything is growing well. Bingo, in come the aphids. But they're not just causing problems. They are wildlife. They're part of the ecosystem of the garden. And of course, where you have aphids, you have predators. That could be blue tits, it could be lacewings, but above all, it's ladybirds. And they do consume a huge amount of aphids. An adult ladybird will eat 5,000 of them. So very quickly, a balance was restored in the garden. And I personally like to try and let the garden look after itself as much as possible. And to really encourage that, you need a garden full of plants, full of trees and shrubs and wild areas. And if you've got a new garden, that can be tricky, and you can have an imbalance. So one way to deal with it is to import your own predators. And I've got here some ladybirds, which I've got mail order, and you can look on our website for addresses or the back of gardening magazines. And they come packed in popcorn. And all you do is let them out next to the aphids, and you just pop them out onto the plant, There you are, boys. Lunchtime. No more popcorn, get to work. That's it. That will start feeding and the balance will start to establish itself. Now you can see here we've got brown aphids and there are over 200 different types. They tend to be plant specific. Some are green, which you normally see on roses, black ones, which we've got here on the cardoons and you see on broad beans, and they do tend to spread virus from plant to plant. So it's very important to grow your plants hard. Harden them off well before planting them out, give them lots of cold weather, don't overfeed them, because all you'll do is encourage lush growth. The aphids love that, that's what they're after. But there will come a time when you want to intervene. You're not prepared to let nature take its course, or the plants are not looking at all happy. And there are things you can do about them without resorting to chemicals that will damage the whole ecosystem of your garden. Now, the first thing you can do, very practically, is simply spray them with water. Now that is remarkably effective, but only really useful on big plants like those cardoons, because the smaller plants you just bash them over. However, there are sprays that you can use that are fully organic. This one is based on fatty acids, and that's soft soap, and it coats the insects, stops them breathing, and also in the case of aphids, it causes them to explode, but it will kill beneficial insects. So all these sprays you want to use at night or at dawn when there aren't bees around. But the good thing about them is they're not residual. They work on contact and they won't damage anything that comes along after it's dried out. I think this probably is the most attractive organic option because it's based on rapeseed, and again that just coats the aphid and stops it breeding. And if you use it on vegetables, you can eat the vegetables within an hour or two. There's no harm there at all. Now, not many people know that seaweed actually works on controlling aphids. And of course, it's mainly used for encouraging the health of the plant, which enables it to resist aphid attack or any viruses that it brings. But it will also work as a very mild insecticide. Finally, if you grow rhubarb, you can make your own by boiling up a rhubarb leaf, and it's the oxalic acid in the rhubarb that works. You boil it up, mix it with water, use it as a spray, so it's a cheap way of doing the job. Now, there's a group of plants that doesn't seem to suffer too much from aphids, and those are herbs, and that's because of the oils that they produce. And last week, I went and visited Julia Scott, who's got the most beautiful walled herb garden right in the middle of the city of Worcester. Where did your interest, even passion for herbs, begin?
I was actually frightened of them. I didn't know how to use them, I didn't know how they grew, so I got myself some books and started reading. And as I overcame this fear and started using them around the house and in the kitchen, I became absolutely intoxicated by herbs at all levels.
Did you set out to make a garden to show how beautiful herbs could be, or did it just happen like that?
It's a bit of both. Part of it's just been serendipity and it just happens, and part of it was quite deliberate. So you can actually see, even in the flower gardens, there are herbs. When we bought this place 9 years ago, you actually couldn't get in the gate for dead trees, brambles and ground elder. Someone did some research for us and discovered that what we had bought had been a Victorian walled kitchen garden. And as we cleared the jungle, to our great astonishment, the original garden was still there. This tall plant here is probably the most bitter herb in the garden, wormwood.
Wormwood.
I don't know if you've ever smelt it, but
I
lot
have,
of people...
and I've tried tasting it too.
Oh, not a good idea. But I use it because I've discovered that wasps absolutely loathe the smell of it. So if you're working out in the garden, you could stick a bit behind your ear and it'd be a wasp-free zone all around you.
Plenty of comfrey in flower.
Yes, I use lots of comfrey. I make comfrey ointment and comfrey oil, which I couldn't be without, and of course it's
Why couldn't
used...
you be without it? What do you use
Because
it for?
it's absolutely wonderful for bruises,
Yeah.
swollen joints, pains in joints. Not that I suffer from gout, but it's wonderful for gout.
I know someone who does. I must put them onto it.
Right, oil of comfrey. One of the loveliest salad flavours in the garden, Buckler's sorrel. Just bite into that. That lovely, sharp, lemony flavour.
Really lemony, isn't it?
Yes, wonderful with any salad. It lifts the salad. Then Sweet Sicily looks like the planting in the hedgerow, but it's a sister plant to cow parsley, and this is the natural replacement for sugar.
Really, how do you use it?
Well, it neutralises the acid of fruit. So if you put it in with the rhubarb, don't add sugar, cook in the normal way, and then test for sugar at the end.
And can you use that with any fruit?
Yes, apples, wonderful with plums, and the good thing about it is very helpful. It comes back as the rhubarb comes out of the ground.
Perfect.
Now we come to the sage bed. Do you like sages?
I love sage. I love sage on every level because, I mean, the flowers at this time of year are beautiful.
Absolutely wonderful.
Now, this is the narrow-leaf sage.
It is, yes.
Which I think is the best cooking
I agree.
sage.
Yes. People are very frightened to use sage because they feel it's so strong that it would overwhelm the dish, but it's not true.
Not at all. Now, medicinally, you use it for what, sore throat?
Sore throats, you can make a gargle, boil some up, let it cool down a little bit, and gargle with it.
You've got the variegated sage there. Next to it is variegated horseradish.
It is. It's one of my favourite plants, and I know not everybody's, but it is beloved by flower rangers, and you can see why.
But the only problem with horseradish, in my experience, is if you let it get into a border, it can become a terrible weed.
It should have a big health warning on it, shouldn't it?
Yeah.
But the good news is the variegated form does not spread. Herbs give you the great spirit of the garden. People forget just how colourful the texture of the leaves are, and then the flowers, not to mention the perfume.
That is a very beautiful garden, and you can visit it. It's open tomorrow afternoon for the Organic Gardening Weekend, and as part of the National Garden Scheme, it's open on the 26th of June and the 31st of July. That's in the afternoons. The details you'll find on our website, but I can tell you from experience, parking isn't great, so park down the street and walk the last bit. It's worth it. Now, one of the reasons I went along to see Julia's garden was to get ideas for the herb garden, because if you remember, I made a herb garden outside the back door, which in principle is great, but in practice it never really worked in that area. Thought about making it bigger, but actually I've decided to move the herbs to here, which is the small town fruit garden, because the combination of herbs and fruit is great. They go well together. They both look marvellous. Now, the first thing I had to do was get the soil right. Herbs like good drainage, but think of a bleached, sunny hillside, and that's exactly the right conditions. The last thing you want to do is add too much manure or compost, because they don't need feeding, they just need drainage. And I've added lots and lots of grit to what is very heavy soil. Having done that, then it's ready to plant. And I've moved as many of the herbs as I possibly can, and that includes some of the large plants like this rosemary. In fact, what's interesting to see is how the rosemary are fared. This one is looking fine, seems to have taken well. You can see that this one's suffering. It's drooping at the ends. So I'll have to water that well. Just because it's a Mediterranean herb and likes good drainage doesn't mean to say that it can do without any water. But it'll be all right. That'll cope well. And I want to create a situation whereby when you're sitting here or walking through, you can reach out and gather herbs. So I think the way to start planting is to work out what will be most useful and be used most often and put those closest to the edge. Well, rosemary certainly wants a sunny position, so I think this could come over here on that side, and it makes sense to flank it with another one. So something along those lines. We've got purple sage, which is a little bit less hardy than some of the green sages, but adds that texture. And beautiful. Oh, that smell is so strong and fragrant. And of course has wonderful flowers. And I've bought in some thyme, but I've also got plenty of thyme which are salvaged from our garden. And the one thing about thyme is it hates shade of any kind. Even its own neighbouring plants will make it leggy. So as soon as it's finished flowering, you want to cut it hard back, and then you get those lovely, soft, succulent shoots, which is what you want. This fennel potted up, but it'll transplant, and I think we can put it near the middle of the border. in here next to the green gauge. And the great thing about fennel is you can cook with the leaves, you can use the seeds in late summer, early autumn. They're wonderful, especially with pork. It's good medicinally, and a beautiful plant growing up through other plants adds a sort of fuzzy edge to the picture. Really beautiful. Okay, sink those in. Along this path, I'm going to put some marjoram. Now, you can get confused between marjoram and oregano, but essentially they're the same plants. We call our native plant marjoram, and the French call it oregano, and that's where the confusion begins and ends. But call it what you like, it needs to be treated the same way, which is rather like thyme, cut back hard. And then you get fresh, new growth that's much nicer to cook with, and the plant stays healthier. Now, most of these plants are fully hardy as long as they've got drainage and plenty of sunshine in the summer. But this lemon verbena, which is very beautiful and wonderful lemon fragrance, isn't hardy, but worth giving a go in a sunny site. In a minute, Chris and Rachel are going to be planting up other Mediterranean plants, the scented leaf pelargoniums, which are not really hardy, but worth growing in any garden. But first, let's have a look at the full range of pelargoniums. The National Collection is held by the Key family, who own a specialist pelargonium nursery with 2,000 specimens near Pebworth in Warwickshire.
In the major part of the collection, we have the zonal pelargonium and the regal pelargonium. The zonal pelargonium is so called because of the strong dark zone on the leaf. It comes in many types of flowers, such as the single flower. This is Highfield's Pride. We also have double flowers. This particular variety is Red Satisfaction, and then we have Pink Satisfaction behind it. And also, for complete contrast, we have the double doubles. Now, these are rosebuds. They date back to the Victorian times. This particular variety is Apple Blossom Rosebud. Now, the zonal pelargonium may be more recognisable to the general public as the geranium. This was a botanical mistake. They were thought to be the same family group as our own hardy geraniums, where they're not. My zonal pelargoniums are not hardy. If you leave them outside in the winter, they will die. But our ordinary geranium is perfectly hardy and stays out in the garden and grows in the garden quite happily year after year. One of the best characteristics of the regal pelargonium is the vast colour range, including black. This particular variety is called Mysterioso, and it was actually raised by my mother. To keep continuous flowering in a regal pelargonium, it's very important to deadhead, and also to feed all the time with a good tomato feed. It must be at least once a week, and it can be more often during the high season.
An important part of Ursula's collection is the original species pelargonium that grows wild in the landscapes of South Africa. They are the parent plants from which today's 10,000 plus varieties were cultivated.
Now, this is Tris. This was the original plant brought in from South Africa in about 1620. And as you can see, it bears no resemblance whatsoever to any pelargonium you'll ever see. Foliage is rather like carrots and a very odd purple-black flower.
The variety of pelargoniums is truly amazing. And Ursula's collection is all the more remarkable for the number of different subgroups that she must include. She has 100 plants in the ivy leaf section, which most of us use for our hanging baskets. Angel pelargoniums take their name from their delicacy, with smaller leaves and flowers. Ursula has over 60 of these, and the coloured leaf pelargoniums have their own individual charm.
This section we have here, one of my favourites. Now, it's not a lot of colour, but it has an extra added bonus with this one. All the leaves are scented, so this is our scented leaf pelargoniums. Now, Odoratissimum has a good strong scent of apples, but it's not fresh apples, golden delicious. Now, this is store apples. This is the smell that was in my grandmother's house. You used to open the door and you could smell the store apples from the cellar, and it's really strong. Reunion rose is quite a rare plant to this country, found in quantities in Africa because it's used in the essential oil trade. It has that wonderful rose scent. It's called geranium oil, which I don't like to use the word in here because it really should be pelargonium oil, but I suppose after all these years you can't really start changing names like that.
So what do you think of pelargoniums?
Once you start growing them, they're rather addictive. And the fragrance is like nothing else. It's stunning.
This particular one caught my eye just because the flowers are so delicate.
Which one's that?
Fragrance.
That is fragrance.
Fragrance, yeah. But it's, in fact, the scent, it's supposed to be pine scented. But see what you think.
This is all very subjective, isn't it? Because,
very.
see, I think that smells more like basil, to be honest, than pine.
Well, whatever you think of the scent, what they do need is a nice gritty compost, really good drainage. They're plants used to living in warm climates, so they need a sunny spot as well. And I'm just going to use a layer of grit on the top as well, just to top dress it again. Just keep the leaves off the wet soil, keep them nice and dry, and it looks pretty.
Where are you putting those? Along the wall?
I think just all along the front wall. They'll get a bit more light there as well. And this is an unusual one. Now, a variegated one. What do you think of that? Crisp and variegata. That's lemony, isn't it?
Yeah, that is very lemony, very zesty. Yeah. And, of course, no cottage garden would be complete without its climbing plants. Now, we were going to run a series of wires along this outhouse here behind us. However, as you might be able to hear, there's some blue tits nesting. So we thought we wouldn't run the wires along there. We'd make some wigwams, at least until the autumn, and then once the birds are finished, we can put the climbers against the wall. And one of the finest climbers for evening scent is the honeysuckles, and this one is called Graham Thomas, with its wonderful clear yellow flowers and pollinated by moths, which is precisely why it's most fragrant in late evening. Perfect when you're sitting with a gin and tonic on the chair over there.
I have to say, though, I think if you're going to put that there, I think it needs a partner. And what about the sweet pea? A nice everlasting sweet pea. If you have a couple on there,
Okay.
I'm going to put a couple on this side. What I love about having these tripods in the middle of the border is that you get height in the centre. And I love these everlasting sweet peas. They're not scented, but what you do get is a perennial. This particular one is red pearl. It does come in pink and white as well, and the white one has got particularly large flowers. Now, the other thing is that I'm planting the sweet pea on the inside of the leg of the tripod so that you're less likely to hoe off the plant accidentally. So just firm that in really well. And then I'm just going to use a bit of string and just tie that to the support just to get it going.
This is Corsican mint with its tiny mats of foliage. Lies very prostrate, hardly sticking its head up any more than about 2 centimetres. And putting it amongst the paving stones like this means that as you come up the path with your gin and tonic on a summer's evening, stop giggling, you'll just crush the foliage and get that wonderful pungent smell. And it is, for a very small plant, it is incredibly rich in a very spicy, fresh, minty fragrance. And you get little tiny white or slightly lilac pink flowers.
Well, they're getting on in the cottage garden. There are things I can be doing in the vegetable garden. Now, I noticed a day or two ago that the aphids have got to my broad beans. And you can see in here, look at that. Absolutely coated with them. And what they love is the soft, sappy growth. And the black aphid is particularly attracted to broad beans. Now, you can water them off and you can spray them, but by far the best thing to do is just pinch the tops out like that, taking the aphids with them, but most importantly, taking their food supply. Now, I see we've got ants on there. If you have got ants on your broad beans, they're not after the beans, they're after the aphids, and they're not harming the aphids either. They're milking them for their honeydew. So by removing the aphids, we'll remove the ants. It's time now to plant up your courgettes. The nights are warmer, the soil is warm, and they'll grow away really fast. In this bed, we had our overwintering onions, which we harvested a couple of weeks ago. Courgettes like plenty of richness and moisture, and that applies to pumpkins, squashes, courgettes, and cucumbers if you grow them outside. So 3 in that space are plenty, because they will spread and spread, and we're going to have to cut them back anyway. I shall excavate a really good hole and then supplement the soil with some nice compost from our compost heap. Now put a little bit of soil back over the top of that. And we'll plant that. And the point is I'm planting it deep, well below the level of the ground. Now the soil I've taken out, I'm going to work into a sort of natural saucer, so that when we water it, which I intend to do at least once a week, it'll have a real soak, and that's the way we'll get a healthy plant with lots of those delicious young courgettes. When the weather's nice and dry like this, it's the perfect time to hoe. Now, I think hoeing in the vegetable garden is the best way to keep on top of the weeds. But a little tip is to sharpen your hoe. This is a sharpener I use to keep the secateurs in good shape. And if you think of the hoe as a blade, because what you're doing is cutting the plants. So just keep that good and sharp, and you'll make your work much easier and also be much more effective. And the secret of hoeing is just to work lightly just beneath the surface, cutting off the plants, leaving them on the surface so they dry in the sun, which is why it's pointless hoeing in wet weather, because the plants won't die off and there's a real chance that they'll re-root. And to hoe little and often, you'll keep on top of the weeds. While we're here, you must admire the asparagus that has grown so well. I put this in March on a cold day. It's all grown and developed these lovely fronds, which will feed the roots, and that will give us a crop next year. And these aren't the only plants that have grown well this year.
Once you start to gather them together, it's amazing how many plants
you've been very busy.
Well, yeah, they've been propagated from all over the place, actually. Quite a few cuttings, things like the osteospermums, 2 trays of penstemons.
I recognise these
rosemary.
plants. Isn't that in my garden?
They look very similar to the ones in your
That
garden.
is the one in my garden.
Yeah, they were from your garden.
It is actually, seeing them all laid out like this, it's quite impressive, really,
Yeah,
isn't
it is
it?
impressive. And you'll be pleased to know they're not going to waste, because all these plants are going to Gardeners World Live next week for our plant swap. So if you've got anything that's rare or unusual, or that just hasn't got an appropriate home, bring it along and swap it for some of our plants.
You know, I'm not going to be there. It's the first Gardeners World Live I'm not going to be at for about 5 years, so I know Sarah's going to be there, so enjoy yourselves. Bring me back something unusual. There's a challenge.
Red wellies.
Now, whether you can bring a plant or not, do get along to the show if you can. It opens on Wednesday, it opens at 9 o'clock in the morning, goes through till 6, and it's Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And if you want information about tickets, you can ring 0870 902 0555. And if you just can't get along, well, the show will be coming from there next Friday at the same time. So see you then. Right, we've got to label these, you know.
Yes, you're not going to be. You can label them.
Yes, you label. It'll be a warm and largely dry weekend everywhere. There might be a few showers in eastern England, but elsewhere the sun will shine, it'll reach 23 degrees and it will be exceptionally still. On Sunday morning there will be a little bit of rain going into Highland Scotland and some drizzle on the west coast, but generally it'll be a more cloudy, rather humid day right across the country. If you want more detailed information for your area, do go to our website, and wherever you are, have a great weekend.